Tantor Audio presents The Gluten Lie and Other Myths About What You Eat by Levinovitz, Ph.D. Narrated by Barry Press. If you stopped eating gluten, you'd feel way fucking better all day. Whenever you feel shitty, that's because of gluten. It's just true. Gluten's a vague term. It's something used to categorize things that are bad. You know, calories, that's a gluten. Fat, that's a gluten. Seth Rogen. This is the end. Introduction. Once upon a toxin. More than 100 million Americans want to avoid gluten, and they are in good company. Oprah's 21-day cleansing diet is gluten-free. Bill Clinton's personal weight loss guru, Dr. Mark Hyman, has asked if modern supergluten is a dietary demon. In the best-selling book Grain Brain, neurologist David Perlmutter argues that it causes dementia and Alzheimer's. And in Wheat Belly, over 1 million copies sold, cardiologist William Davis includes a section titled, in all caps, "Bread is my crack." Dietary demon, indeed. It's hard to believe that 20 years ago virtually no one, including health enthusiasts, had even heard of gluten. Best-selling diet books omitted it entirely. Back then, the nation's latest dietary demon had a different name: monosodium glutamate. Where menus and labels now advertise foods as gluten-free, restaurant owners and manufacturers once had to reassure their customers with a different promise: no MSG. True, MSG seems safe. It's a sodium salt first extracted from seaweed by Japanese scientists in 1908, and a staple seasoning in the cuisine of long-lived East Asians. But health-conscious Americans knew better. Everyone had read the newspapers and watched the TV exposés which revealed the crystalline flavor enhancer as a deadly poison. By the mid-1980s, it was common knowledge that MSG caused devastating migraines, irritable bowel syndrome, and a suite of other symptoms. Still worse, some authorities believed it caused brain damage and chronic disease. Only fools and Chinese people would risk their health by consuming such a potent toxin. The MSG scare began on April 4th, 1968, with a letter to the New England Journal of Medicine from Chinese-American physician Robert Ho Man Kwok. In the letter titled Chinese Restaurant Syndrome, Kwok reported that after eating in Chinese restaurants, he regularly experienced numbness, general weakness, and palpitation. His colleagues had suggested he was allergic to soy sauce, but Kwok knew that couldn't be right. He often used soy sauce in his own home cooking with no ill effect. The cause is obscure, he admitted, after identifying 3 likely suspects: cooking wine, because the syndrome resembles to some extent the effects of alcohol, monosodium glutamate, and high levels of sodium in restaurant Chinese food. An avalanche of responses poured into the NEJM. Everyone had experienced the syndrome. In May, the journal printed no less than 10 of these letters, many written by highly credentialed physicians, each endorsing a different cause of Chinese restaurant syndrome. One suggested muscarine poisoning related to the ingestion of imported mushrooms. Another singled out the elusive tannins of tea and frozen food processing of Chinese vegetables. Terrifyingly, one neurologist recounted treating a stroke in an otherwise healthy patient, inexplicable, save for the fact that 3 hours earlier the man had eaten Chinese food. The rapidity in which MSG became a nationally recognized health threat is astonishing, especially given that it was 1968, a time when telephone wires and printed paper still regulated the spread of information. Less than 2 months after Kwok's letter, the New York Times ran an article under the headline, "Chinese Restaurant Syndrome Puzzles Doctors." Within 6 months, the prestigious journal Nature published research by scientists who definitively identified MSG as the culprit, and, alarmingly, pointed out that it lurked everywhere, not just in Chinese food, TV dinners, canned goods, seasoning, even baby food. Utterly convinced by their research, the authors of the Nature article sought out a young lawyer advocate named Ralph Nader, with whom they campaigned to have MSG removed from baby food and stricken from the Food and Drug Administration's generally recognized as safe list. In October 1969, Gerber, Heinz, and Squibb Beechnut caved to enormous public pressure and announced that their baby food would no longer be made with MSG. And on April 4, 1970, 2 years to the day from the publication of Kwok's letter, the National Research Council ruled that MSG was fit for human consumption, but not necessarily by infants, a cryptic pronouncement that only heightened safety concerns. For millions of sufferers, the discovery of MSG sensitivity came as a tremendous relief. Headaches, upset stomachs, aching joints, cold sweats, colicky babies. Finally, the mystery of endless recurring ailments had been solved, and the solution made sense. Most domestic cooks were unfamiliar with monosodium glutamate, a foreign, scary-sounding chemical. Food industry spokespeople were calling for calm deliberation, proof positive they were hiding something big. After all, if there was no need for concern, why did they go ahead and remove MSG from baby food? But amid the outcry against MSG, science marched on, ever skeptical of snap judgments and anecdotal evidence. After many rigorous studies, the panic proved unfounded. In contrast to popular belief, clinical trials strongly suggested that MSG did not produce symptoms like migraines. Today, food allergy experts believe the overwhelmingly majority of reactions to MSG are psychological, not physiological. According to the 2013 edition of Food Allergy, Adverse Reactions to Foods and Food Additives, a comprehensive reference manual for hospitals and private practitioners, there is little doubt about the rarity of MSG symptom complex, even among individuals who believe themselves to be MSG sensitive. In other words, your MSG headaches are probably just headaches. But when it comes to food sensitivities, people are incredibly unwilling to question self-diagnosis. That would mean the problem was psychological to begin with, and there's something intensely disturbing about the notion that we can make ourselves sick. Psychology, not physiology, becomes the mechanism of illness, and the individual displaces bad food as the source of blame for their suffering. This can make us feel vulnerable, stupid, and weak, as though we have the choice to be better, but lack the mental acuity to manage it. On top of all that, it's hard not to feel like a psychological explanation trivializes your condition, hence the expression, "It's only in your head." And so, the myth of MSG sensitivity lives on. Among those who believe they react to MSG, the long-standing conclusion of allergists borders on heresy and often provokes extreme anger. Here are two representative responses to a 2014 online essay, Is MSG Misunderstood?, published on Livestrong.com, a popular source of health information. What an insensitive article! I am a person who suffers when I consume MSG. I get a terrible migraine, and I feel awful for hours. For me, this result is consistent and reproducible. I lived with these migraines for years before discovering what triggered them. It is very upsetting to read an article telling me that my symptoms are psychosomatic. This is like saying the devil is good. I went to a Chinese restaurant for my son's birthday, and after feasting, when we came out, he as sick, disoriented, and ripped of the rear view mirror. You cannot rehabilitate MSG, so just stop. or I will stop reading your blog.
The anger in these comments reflects the unwavering faith people place in their own dietary diagnoses, a faith that is often misplaced. Figuring out the effects of one's diet is enormously complicated.
For most of us, cutting out MSG or going gluten-free involves broader changes in how we approach food. That makes it difficult to sort out what caused what. Your headaches went away, but was it the absence of MSG or an increase in home-cooked meals?
Did you lose weight by going gluten-free or by eating less fast food? To complicate matters further, discovering a dietary solution feels empowering, and empowerment itself can lead to significant positive physiological changes.
Unless we can be absolutely certain of our self-diagnosis, it's best to keep an open mind about alternative explanations. But admitting uncertainty is hard, particularly uncertainty about how our own bodies work. So, instead, we lie to ourselves. We lie to ourselves about our ability to recall symptoms and their intensity, the fact of having had a headache, say, and its severity. We lie to ourselves about our ability to recall what we've eaten, a perennial problem for researchers who rely on self-reported food consumption data. Can you really remember how much kung pao chicken you ate 2 weeks ago? Did you eat more of the vegetables, the chicken, or the peanuts? Finally, we lie to ourselves about our ability to accurately diagnose the relationship between what we consume and our experience of physical and mental symptoms. Scientists universally acknowledge the prevalence of these lies. They are the reason for placebo-controlled studies of food and medicine, like those conducted on MSG, which substitute a neutral substance for the substance being tested. Placebo-controlled studies are necessary to distinguish actual physiological effects from the power of positive or negative thinking. Antidepressants and gluten-free diets can make us feel better just because we think they will, and MSG can make us sick for the same reason. That's why personal testimonials cannot, in themselves, establish the efficacy of a drug or diet. Just imagine if being super convinced that something worked made it a legitimate treatment. Blessed water from the fountain at Lourdes could count as highly effective medicine. Exorcism would be a great way to deal with behavioral problems, and modern medical science as we know it wouldn't exist. Everyone recognizes that expectations can shape experiences and distort memories. Yet while most of us recognize how self-deception shapes stories about supernatural healing, we are less willing to consider how it might shape our own stories of dietary salvation. Unfortunately, where people are prone to self-deception, they are also open to deception by authority figures. When the general public believed that demons made them sick, exorcists made money selling holy water. Now we are bombarded with thousands of dietary solutions to our health problems, endorsed by genuine doctors and nutritionists. Fat-melting miracle pills, detoxification smoothies, vitamin-rich goji berries, and we buy them figuratively and literally. Frequently, these solutions come packaged with a scapegoat. Get rid of this one terrible substance, and there will be no more cancer, no MSG, no headaches. Eliminate gluten, eliminate Alzheimer's, and melt fat in the process. It's that simple. Point an accusatory finger, tell the right story, and a new demon is born. Like gluten today, MSG was once the scapegoat of choice. While debate about the dangers of MSG continued to rage in scientific journals, impatient doctors and eager advocates went public with premature conclusions. The mythic narrative quickly took shape of virtuous researchers fighting against evil baby poisoning corporations. Media outlets played up the story's sensationalist allure, featuring hyperbolic headlines like this one from the Chicago Tribune in 1979. Chinese food make you crazy? MSG is #1 suspect. Paranoia snowballed, and MSG metamorphosed from a potential allergen to a dietary supervillain. In 1988, Dr. George R. Schwartz, an emergency medicine specialist, published In Bad Taste, the MSG symptom complex, in which he connected MSG to the following ills: ADHD, AIDS, ALS, Alzheimer's, asthma, cancer, diarrhea, depression, gastroesophageal reflux, Huntington's, hyperactivity, hypertension, obesity, Parkinson's, and premenstrual syndrome. 8 years later, neurosurgeon Russell L. Blaylock repackaged Schwartz's theories under the apocalyptic title Excitotoxins, the Taste That Kills. In his book, Blaylock provided a detailed scientific explanation of MSG's toxicity and addictiveness, and added autism to the list of ailments that it caused. Schwartz wrote the foreword, declaring excitotoxins a cutting-edge synthesis by a practicing board-certified neurosurgeon with a deep understanding of the structure and function of the brain. He called for parents to stop poisoning their children and predicted that Blaylock's book would be seen as a landmark work and a marker of our time. Schwartz's predictions did not come to pass. Instead, his license to treat patients was suspended in 2006 after authorities caught him illegally prescribing narcotics and amphetamines. Schwartz still tweets sporadically from a Twitter account located in the Mexican Caribbean. Blaylock is now a marginal figure in the anti-vaccine movement and the star of poorly produced YouTube videos like Nutrition and the Illuminati Agenda. His most recent theory about our health problems singles out chemtrails, clouds of toxins spread secretly by government aircraft for undisclosed purposes. Today, these men look like obvious cranks, but in their time it was hard not to take them seriously. In Bad Taste and Excitotoxins overwhelmed readers with jargon and scientific citations which, combined with the author's medical pedigrees, created a compelling patina of authority. 60 Minutes actually featured Schwartz in a 1991 segment on the dangers of MSG. When Jeff Nettleman, a spokesman for the Grocery Manufacturers Association, complained that Schwartz's appearance could lead to unwarranted panic among consumers, he only reinforced the narrative of evil food companies fighting to keep consumers from the truth, just like tobacco companies had done when faced with damning evidence about cigarettes. The case against MSG also drew strength from a common and convincing myth. The products of technology and modernity are inherently dangerous. Although ridiculous on its face, you wouldn't want to sip public drinking water from 200 years ago. This myth has tremendous cultural currency. According to psychologist Keith Petrie at the University of Auckland, who specializes in how people perceive illness, fear of modernity routinely biases our judgments about medical care and dietary risk factors like MSG. Radio waves, chemicals, these things are invisible and they are extremely powerful, Petrie explains to me. That can be frightening. It makes you feel like you have no control of your health. Schwartz and Blaylock expertly exploited their readers' fear of modernity. The ominous opening sentence of Excitotoxins uses the word chemical twice. What if someone were to tell you that a chemical added to food could cause brain damage in your children, and that this chemical could affect how your children's nervous systems formed during development, so that in later years they may have learning or emotional difficulties. Lay people who struggle to understand Blaylock's technical case against MSG would have had no difficulty in his intuitive premise. Modern substances, chemicals, additives, preservatives, vaccines, MSG, are inherently dangerous. Belief in MSG's toxicity persists despite repeated debunkings. Scientists have confirmed and reconfirmed that the flavor enhancer found in everything from sushi to Doritos is no more suspicious than any other substance. In 2014, the American Chemical Society, the world's largest scientific organization, summarized the consensus yet again in a short video meant to reassure customers that MSG is perfectly safe. Yet an online search turns up scores of popular articles that continue to regurgitate Schwartz's and Blaylock's unsubstantiated alarmism. One article the Huffington Post calls MSG a silent killer lurking in your kitchen cabinets. Another states that chronic MSG ingestion by children may be one reason behind the nation's falling test scores. That's laughable, but not really surprising. For true believers, the myth will always be more sacred than the evidence. If we are serious about the quest for good health, physical and mental, we cannot be slaves to fear and to our desire for easy answers. We must honestly admit our ignorance. We must recognize our capacity for self-deception. And when others, including medical and scientific professionals, refuse to do the same, we must learn to recognize their lies. Sadly, the story of MSG is unexceptional in the world of nutrition science. Well-intentioned doctors constantly jump to unwarranted conclusions about food. Media outlets are always hungry for tales of crusaders fighting evil corporations. Supplement peddlers and diet gurus continue to exploit an irrational public. It would be nice if our current food fears were based on sound, settled science. But as you are about to find out, nothing could be further from the truth. Most beliefs about gluten, fat, sugar, and salt have little basis in fact, and everything to do with a powerful set of myths, superstitions, and lies which, despite modern scientific progress, have remained unchanged for centuries. This book is a call for change. Everyday foods don't have life-giving or death-dealing properties. Grocery stores aren't pharmacies. Your kitchen isn't stocked with silent killers, and the charlatans that make a living on false promises and uncertain science need to be revealed for what they really are. Chapter 1. Science fiction is still fiction. Monks against the grain. I am a scholar of religion. My job is to read sacred texts, myths, histories, commandments, prophecies, and then figure out what they meant and why they were persuasive. Although I specialize in classical Chinese thought, knowledge of other traditions informs my work. This is true for anyone who studies religion. If you are puzzling over the story of Noah's Ark, it helps to examine similar flood myths, like the one in the Babylonian Epic of Gilgamesh, which comes complete with ark and animal rescue, or the one in the Hindu Mahabharata, where in addition to rescuing animals, the hero saves the world's grains and seeds. The recurrence of this story at different historical moments and with cultural variations means that flood myths should be read as metaphors for divine punishment and cleansing, not as ancient weather reports. It also means that if a new myth surfaces about some forgotten North American flood, we probably shouldn't waste our time searching the Grand Canyon for the remains of an ark. Religion and science are commonly understood to be separate explanatory systems, So my expertise may seem unrelated to nutrition. Modern debates about gluten, fat, sugar, and salt look scientific, not religious. They involve discussions of gut microbes and glucose, not gods and devils. And they draw evidence from peer-reviewed studies, not divine revelations. Again and again, the specialists I interviewed for this book asked how I ended up writing about a subject so different from what I typically study. My answer was simple. I told them about the grain-free monks of ancient China. Like all diet gurus, these monks mocked the culinary culture of their time. They promised that a revolutionary diet could cure disease, quickly converting a substantial cult of followers.
And, of course, they were wrong. The key to understanding and debunking fad diets, I suggested, wasn't science, but rather history. Once you see enough of the same archetypal myths and the same superstitions, new dietary claims start to look a lot like flood myths.
So, what was going on with the grain-free monks? 2,000 years ago, the so-called 5 grains, 2 kinds of millet, hemp, rice, and beans, defined Chinese civilization. Early court historians used the adoption of agriculture and the cultivation of grains to distinguish civilized people from barbarians. Devotional poetry compared grains to the gods and praised them as the foundation of human life. To avoid the 5 grains was, quite literally, sacrilegious. Yet a small minority of religious practitioners, the founders of Taoism, scandalized their contemporaries by referring to the 5 grains as the scissors that cut off life. According to their radical teachings, conventional Chinese diets rotted and befouled our internal organs and led to disease and early death. Monks counseled seekers of long life to adopt a diet of plants gathered in the wild, supplemented with special minerals and exotic elixirs, brewed according to proprietary alchemical formulas. The spectacular results of this strict regimen were documented in biographies of holy sages: perfect health, eternal youth, immortality, the ability to fly, and teleport. People in ancient China weren't stupid. Plenty of them doubted accounts of flying alchemists who never got sick. But despite basic logic and evidence to the contrary, the philosophy of the grain-free monks gained popularity. That's because then, as now, the appeal of dietary fads had to do with myths, not facts. In the case of the Taoists, grain prohibition represented rejection of the modern culture and the promise of return to a mythic natural paradise. Suffering, disease, and death were ineradicably aspects of the present. So monks explained their dietary practices with an appealing fiction about a pre-agricultural paradise past. When grains were the culinary symbol of Chinese civilization, Taoists argued that rejecting grains was the key to escaping modernity's ills. Later, when meat-eating took on the symbolic importance once held by consuming grain, Taoists' taboos shifted from the 5 grains to meat and blood. Rejection of the status quo, not science, determined the food prohibition du jour. But although the specific prohibition changed, the archetypal myth of a dietary route back to paradise remained constant, along with its false promises of eternal youth and perfect health. The myth of paradise past is one of many irrational beliefs that recur across cultures and generations, influencing our attitude toward food. The history of dietary practices is full of superstition and magical thinking. From eating vegetarian because that's what Adam and Eve did in the garden, to treating impotence with a tiger penis elixir. Once adopted, such practices become an important part of one's identity, and therefore hard to question or give up. This is a version of what economists call the sunk cost fallacy. When you embark on an elimination diet, you make a personal sacrifice along with a public declaration of your decision. Ending the diet means admitting your sacrifice was wasted and your decision was misguided. Unpleasant considerations that face.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?